good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News. This is Saturday morning with Esther and Philip.
And we have a fantastic show lined up for you today. We will, of course, be discussing the resignation of Prime Minister Boris Johnson with several of our guests. But we're also going to be looking at woke universities in the UK and 50-year mortgages. And one other thing, naked attraction.
All of that plus much more after your latest headlines with Alice.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The race to become the new Prime Minister is gathering pace. Former Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch is the latest to throw her hat into the ring. The MP for Saffron Walden says she supports lower taxes and a tight budget. It comes after Rishi Sunak announced his bid for Tory leader. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is also expected to run. Defence Select Committee member Mark Francois told GB News he has a clear vision of what he wants to see.
If we want companies from around the globe to invest in Britain, which we do, increasing the rate of corporation tax that they would have to pay is a disincentive rather than an incentive. So personally, I'd like to see whoever wins give a commitment to reducing corporation tax rather than increasing it.
The Defence Secretary insists the UK government remains totally committed to helping the Ukrainian war effort, and that won't change after Boris Johnson is replaced as Prime Minister. Ben Wallace, who's seen as a key contender in the leadership contest, was speaking as he visited a British Army training camp where thousands of Ukrainian soldiers are being trained before returning to the front line. Our Home and Security editor Mark White reports.
They are the familiar sounds of battle, but these Ukrainian troops are thousands of miles from the dangers of the front line. They are the first of at least 10,000 new recruits to the Ukrainian armed forces who are being trained here in the UK by the British military.
We're working on getting you some Ukrainian uniform rather than using the British one.
Checking on their progress, the UK Defence Secretary. He knows these Ukrainian troops and their countrymen and women back home are extremely grateful for the support and leadership Boris Johnson's government has provided. That level of commitment will remain, he says, whoever becomes the new British Prime Minister.
Britain is full square behind them, and the assistance to Ukraine we give is not just one person. We're not me, not the Prime Minister. It's the whole effort. We've got the British Army up here today, up in the north of England, training Ukrainians on what it needs to do. It's got people in Poland and in Estonia standing by our NATO colleagues. That's the reality, is that actions matter in all of this. And while the Prime Minister will be incredibly sad to leave this post, he has led from the front on Ukraine, but the whole of the political system is supportive of what we're doing in Ukraine. I don't expect that to finish at all.
Once the fresh mag's on, you're going to cop the weapon system again.
The UK has already provided £1.3 billion in support for Ukraine and supplied thousands of anti-tank missiles, artillery and other equipment. For the Ukrainian recruits here, even just a few weeks training with the British Army is highly valuable.
I believe we're here to share the experience and receive British experience from the soldiers, to receive proper trainings from our trainers, and just combine that and receive the best and most valuable skills.
It's very important to combine our military experience with your standards, UK Army, and compare and make our soldier better.
Most of these recruits left ordinary jobs in Ukraine to defend their country. Many had never handled weapons before the conflict, but their British training officers say they can't fault their motivation and commitment.
They're very, very motivated. It's really impressive to see. So with quite high ambitions in terms of the training, expecting to have to scale back, but the level that they're at is incredible. They've met the expectations, if not more.
The battle for number 10 has barely even begun. But in the weeks ahead, all of the candidates will be keen to reassure the government in Kyiv that Britain's support in their fight against Russian aggression is unwavering, whoever gets the top job. Mark White, GB News.
A serving Metropolitan Police officer has been charged with rape.
Hello, welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil, and what a show we have got lined up for you today. Now, of course, the only story in town is Boris Johnson and his resignation, so we're going to start straight away with the newspaper review, Phil, and I have got Henry Hill here, Deputy Political Editor of Con Home, and do you want to start with your view of what's been happening this week?
Well, I mean, we're finally, Boris Johnson, after a very agonising has finally announced that he's going to resign. He's not resigned yet, he's staying in office until there's a new leader. And so the Conservative Party have got underway with the leadership contest. I think there's going to be a vast number of candidates, which is obviously great news for those of us who cover the contest professionally. But so far, first out of the traps is Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and Suella Braverman, the Attorney General. And there's a few more declared today.
I've got to say, Henry, people thought that Boris had a bad week last week. But, you know, what about me? 56, I think it was, ministerial resignations, and I still didn't get called up for a post in government. I mean, it's got to be. I mean, that's got to be worse than the week that Boris had, hasn't it?
Oh well, I wasn't going to say anything, but you know, this is. I think if it's any comfort to you, these ministerial positions probably aren't going to be filled for very long. Any new Tory leader is going to want to do their own reshuffle, put their own stamp on the party. So anyone who has been called up to serve is probably only serving for July and August.
Do you have any sympathy for Boris?
I mean, I've been a critic of the Prime Minister for a long time. I think it's never easy to have to resign a position like this. He obviously won that majority in 2019, had huge ambitions to reshape British politics. The pandemic blew him off course, but I think ultimately he has been brought to this pass by his own decisions. You know, this represented frustration not just with some of those scandals, those personal scandals that we saw, but also a sense of frustration amongst many Conservatives that this government, despite having that huge majority, wasn't doing, you know, taking action on planning reform, wasn't delivering the kind of ambitious agenda that some of us maybe expected when he won the first major Conservative majority since 1987.
I always say it's always painful seeing a leader go. They never sometimes make it easy for themselves. Could Boris have made it easier for himself? Could he have gone earlier? People now talk about his legacy. He'll be thinking about his legacy. And let's remember, to a lot of people, 80-seat majority, got sort of Brexit done. Was this sort of surge of energy at the top of a party in the country? Did he wait too long?
I think he did, and I think this is actually sort of typical of how he's behaved ever since Owen Paterson, that sort of first scandal that set off the chain of events, which I think have led to today. He's very stubborn, which is good or bad in different contexts, but he's always wanted to dig in. He's never been able to get ahead of a story, and I think this is another example. Once you've started hemorrhaging cabinet ministers, the writing really is on the wall, and I think his stubborn insistence on staying on, it's not going to change the fact that he's leaving, but it's going to colour his legacy.
Should he feel a bit wounded, though, that, you know, all these ministers, they voted for him, or I'm presuming they voted for him, or most of them, maybe some of them didn't, but they voted for him in the no confidence vote, you know, literally 3 weeks ago, and then all of a sudden they're all resigning from his government. Is he entitled to feel a bit let down by those people?
To an extent, although we should remember that he did, I think, grossly mishandle the Chris Pincher allegations since that no-confidence vote. This has been a very badly organised coup.
No, but I get obviously the Chris Pincher thing happened, but, you know, all these people saying, oh, you know, he should have never have appointed him to the position of Deputy Chief Whip and all the rest of it. I always think to myself, if all of these ministers were aware of the sort of rumours or whatever it was about Chris Pincher and felt that appointing him to that position was the wrong thing to do, well, why didn't they resign when they appointed him Deputy Chief Whip? Why did they wait? If it was such a terrible appointment, why did they wait until after there's been a scandal before they resigned? Why did they not resign when he...
Oh, absolutely. There's always an element of politics to these things. I don't think there are many people who can come out of this saying they've acted like a saint, but I think as a pure political calculation, Boris Johnson's ratings are well underwater. I don't see him recovering from the practical business of winning the next election, keeping you guys in Parliament. I think this was probably the right move.
But remember, Nadine Dorries is keeping the Boris flame afloat. She might stand herself. We can talk about that a little bit later. But the people in Cabinet right now, a lot of people that say that they cannot be the person who leads now. They are all tainted. If Boris is tainted, they are tainted.
I think that is something that a lot of them are going to have to grapple with, especially the ones, as you say, who are now striking a very pious note about Boris Johnson's time in government. If they've been serving in his cabinet until last week, the question is, yeah, they will have questions to answer.
Now, Henry, we will be coming back to you a little bit later on, but we're off to Phil.
Well, we're delighted that we're going to be joined by Charles Walker. So Charles Walker, former chairman of the House of Commons Procedure Committee and former vice chair of the 1922 committee. Charles, you're a veteran now of these leadership elections. You've been helping to organise them for many a year. I just wondered, what have you made of the events of the last week?
Pretty distressing, to be honest, Phil. I think we're probably of the same view that the Prime Minister probably should have gone Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, when his position looked impossible. And I think his legacy was damaged by staying on until early on Thursday. I think he announced he was going at 9 o'clock. I think he would have been best advised to go by 2 p.m. on Wednesday, just before the liaison committee met.
The question I wanted to ask you really is, there's talk. I know the 1922 committee haven't yet fully decided the timetable, but there's talk and speculation that they're wanting the whole of the MP part of the process done and dusted by the time of the summer recess, which is a week on Thursday, which seems to me, given that there's so many unknown quantities in this, but there's quite a lot of candidates, but also amongst them quite a few unknown quantities, perhaps to the public. Is that a rather too hasty timetable in order to get it down to the last two? Isn't it, this is important. This is for the Prime Minister of the country. Should we not be taking our time a bit more?
I think it's an ambitious timetable, and I'm not on the 22 anymore, but I think it's an achievable timetable. They'll obviously have to have some quite aggressive thresholds, so maybe 10 to get into the competition. But instead of the last place candidates dropping out, say if they score less than 30 votes, 20 or 30 votes in the earlier rounds, and then you raise that threshold as you go through the contest. So I think you can thin the field out very, very quickly till you get the final two names.
Just to press you on this, I mean, we don't even know who the candidates are yet. And yet by Thursday we could have had two ballots in this particular contest. Is that really a sensible timetable to decide who the next Prime Minister of the country should be?
Well, if you want to be a candidate, you better get a move on, Phil.
Well, I think, Charles, we're one of the few that aren't candidates. We might be the only voters in this contest, to be perfectly honest.
I think we're the only two, along with Philip Hollobone, who haven't been ministers in our 2005. Well, Philip, so we're the sort of cream floating on top of the milk now.
I want to, look at that sort of speed of process in a slightly different way. People have come out now about what Boris should have known or shouldn't have known about Chris Pincher. So I'm wondering, is there not a piece of work to be done by the 1922 committee on due diligence? Because if we are going to truncate the process, shouldn't people be looking now what are in people's past that people might deem unacceptable, something that maybe Boris has had to stand down for? Because I'm not seeing that work being done, which goes back to the point that Philip says we don't want to know, once we've got a new leader in October, September or whatever, that things start coming out of the woodwork. And we know how good journalists are for going into the woodwork and digging out those scandals.
Well, Esther, you're a journalist of long standing. I suspect you and I both know that the digging started last week. In fact, the digging's been going on for quite a long time on the potential candidates. I think once you put your name in the hat, the level of scrutiny will be extraordinary. But I suspect known about the candidates is already known, if that makes sense. I mean, there may be some more research done by the media, but I don't think many of the names will come as a surprise to those that follow in the sort of political world.
Charles, you've made it clear you're not standing in this election. You're one of the few that aren't considering or taking soundings. Have you decided who you're going to vote for?
Yeah, I have. I'm going to support Penny Mordaunt.
And do you want to share with our viewers why you've come to that decision?
Well, I think she's a fantastic communicator. I've seen her in the chamber. But I also like the fact that she's a serving naval officer. She's in the Royal Navy Reserve. She's a commander in the Royal Navy Reserve. She's been on active duty. I think we're in very uncertain times globally, geopolitically. And I think that gives her the edge over the other candidates. Wait and see. I mean, there's a lot of good candidates putting their names forward. There's a lot of fringe candidates as well, Phil, as we both know, but we're probably too polite to mention their names on air. But I'll be any. But there's 2 or 3 people in there who would make fine prime ministers. I just hope once they're elected as party leader and become prime minister, they give them the chance to get on with the job. I fear that our party may well descend into bitter and nasty score settling and infighting. That already seems to be where some people are heading, and I think that will be a tragedy. But I think in balance, it's probably more inevitable than not.
Charles Walker, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and I'm sure that's a big feather in Penny's cap to get your support. Thank you very much indeed. So, Henry, what do you make about this timetable for the election?
I think that it is important that the early rounds are thinned out a bit because, as you say, there's so many candidates running. Not all of them are serious contenders for the leadership. And whilst I understand that some people want to put a marker down, try and get into cabinet, fundamentally, this is not about them. This is about choosing a new prime minister. There's so many urgent nations the country is facing. And I think that if we are going to trim the timetable, it's important we do it at the early stages where we remove some of the also rounds rather than do what John Major suggested and cut the end when you've got 2 candidates and we can actually properly scrutinise them. I think the beginning is where we need to...
Interesting that Charles talked about Penny having a bit of a military past and present, as it were, but then you've got Tom Tugendhat, you've got Ben Wallace. I mean, we've got lots of military going forward this time. What qualities do you think the leader will need to have this time?
I think basically there'll need to be a unifier. There does tend to be a tendency, I think, in British politics to go between somebody who's sort of ideological and ambitious and then somebody who's slightly more conciliatory. And Boris Johnson was definitely the former. So the new leader, a huge challenge. They need to reassure Liberal Democrat-facing voters in the southwest, the Red Wall. So I think somebody who is more towards the centre of the party, who can project a more unifying image, is going to be really important this time.
What struck me about what Charles said was about the fact that he feared there would be bitter recriminations afterwards and that would impact on the new leader. Do you envisage that happening?
Not especially. I think when you contrast this with 1990 and the defenestration of Margaret Thatcher, what's surprising is how relatively united the Parliamentary Conservative Party was about getting rid of Boris Johnson. There was talk if there'd been a second no confidence vote, he'd only have got the support of about 60 MPs. She had spent 10 years doing an awful lot and earned the loyalty of a kind of Praetorian Guard of Tory activists and members. I don't really think we're in the same position this time.
And what do you think the first jobs of the new Prime Minister need to be?
Absolutely need to find a coherent answer to the cost of living crisis. That's going to be, nothing else will matter if people blame the government for the fact that they can't afford to heat their home or feed their families. So that has to be priority one.
And people talk about the machinery, the ability to deliver on your policies. That's crumbled, sort of dysfunctional, people will say, under Boris Johnson. Won't that be a major thing to make sure that you've got the levers of power to be able to solve the problem?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in part, that's a question of political will as much as machinery. I think what we've seen with this government is that on things such as planning, there simply wasn't the will there to pick the fights that needed to be fought. So the new leader will need to be, A, prepared to make some unpopular decisions, and B, have a team in place who is able to deliver them.
I think that the unpopular decisions, it's not about an unpopular decisions. What we need to see is delivery, people delivering on that and not wobbling, saying something that sounds fine to win the leadership, but who has got the strength to actually then follow it through and not buckle under the strain of Twitter.
Do you think Brexit's going to be an important issue in this contest? Do you think Remain and Leave is going to feature highly in this?
I don't necessarily think that who you voted in 2016 matters particularly anymore, but I think that with we've got the Northern Ireland Bill going through Parliament. That's going to put the protocol front and centre. I think every candidate's going to have an answer on what they're going to do about the sea border and our
logical contest. Because I just have a feeling that the Conservative Party is now pretty much a Brexit party now. No, whoever wins, I don't see they're not going to change that or go backwards on that. They're all going to stick, I would imagine, fairly close to the 2019 manifesto because it was seen as being popular and you don't need to call a general election on it. They're probably mainly all, maybe Rishi might be different, but all probably going to say we need immediate tax cuts. So I don't really see this as being a particularly ideological contest. It's more about who's attractive to the voters. How do you see it?
I think that's broadly right. Basically, with 2 years to go, there's not really time to sort of have this big ideological battle. It's about getting over the line at the next election. I think where there will be more wriggle room is in areas where the 2019 manifesto simply didn't have anything in it, like education. So there's more scope there. But on the big things, I think you're right.
I think it needs to be a team rather than an individual. I think the party's so divided. I think the country is so divided. I think they'll need to say who their team is so they can reach out. What do you think?
Well, obviously what happens traditionally in these contests is that as people start getting knocked out in the early rounds, they parley their support. And I imagine what will happen after the first few rounds is suddenly you'll have the current people who are standing endorsing different front runners, and then you'll have teams.
And Rishi's already asking Sajid Javid to stand aside and work with him, so they're already doing it. Spot on. We will be back with you, Henry, in about an hour.
Yes,
then.
Thank you very much indeed.
Now, coming up after the break, we'll be joined by a man who has been described as the UK's greatest living expert on Parliament. So don't go anywhere.
Good morning, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office forecast. And the first day of the weekend offers plenty of sunshine for many places, warm as well across a lot of the country, but a bit damper towards the far northwest of Scotland later. At the moment, though, we've got this very weak weather front just pushing its way southwards across the UK. Barely noticeable if you're out and about, a bit of cloud here and there, tending to give up the ghost as we move on through the day. And that's this area of cloud here coming across parts of Wales, southern England, but many places here seeing some sunshine readily developing through this morning. And then into the afternoon, blue skies across much of the UK with lots of unbroken sunshine around. The eastern Northern Ireland clouding up a little bit later on in the day, as it will do across parts of western and northern Scotland, with some rain affecting the Outer Hebrides and later into the Northern Isles. Here it's a little bit on the cooler side, 13 to 16 Celsius, but for much of the United Kingdom it's going to be a warm afternoon, temperatures peaking around 27 in southern England. Then a glorious evening to come this evening for many parts of the country, lots of sunshine to close out the day. A bit more cloud though across the far northwest, and this cloud will be producing some rain across parts of northern Scotland, particularly Orkney and Shetland, where a few heavier bursts are possible into the early hours of Sunday. Elsewhere though, at least clear spells, if not lengthy clear periods to take us into Sunday morning, and quite a warm night, temperatures no lower than 13 to 16 Celsius. Then on Sunday, high pressure is very much in charge of our weather, so a fine settled day pretty much across the board. These weather fronts initially affecting northern Scotland pulling away, so all parts of the UK just about seeing at least some fine weather on Sunday. So a glorious start to the day for many places. One or two early shallow mist or fog patches readily clearing. Any cloud tended to break up through the day, and the rain away from northern Scotland should be away fairly soon into the afternoon. Widely a warmer day than on Sunday, highs peaking 27 to 29 in the south. And this sets a warm and sunny trend into next week with lots of sunshine around to take us through. A few showers midweek, but before we get there, temperatures could be into the low 30s. Take care.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to the show, and we want to hear from you today, so please contact us, email us with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. Now, to continue our conversation about the historic week in Westminster, we're now joined by a lord who has been described as the UK's greatest living expert on Parliament, Professor Lord Norton of Louth. Philip Norton, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I just wanted to start by asking you, is there any historical equivalence at all to what we've just seen over the last week with sort of 50-odd members of the government resigning in one day?
No, there's no precedent for it, given the scale and the extent to which it's taken place at the same time, and then creating a unique constitutional situation in the sense that there's pressure on the Prime Minister not only to resign, but to resign immediately and have a sort of temporary Prime Minister, which creates a new situation. So we've not been in this situation before.
Controversy about whether or not Boris should be able to continue as Prime Minister. I mean, I haven't been able to understand why there's been any controversy over it, because, of course, David Cameron stayed on when he resigned, and Theresa May stayed on, and nobody batted an eyelid when that happened. So is there any reason at all why Boris should be expected to go and make way?
No, only the exceptional circumstance we find ourselves, and people say, well, look, the circumstances in which he's been pressed to leave. But you're quite right in that the expectation is that a Prime Minister, once they announce they're going, will stay in office until such time as a new leader is elected, at which point the Prime Minister, goes to the palace to resign. So that's the expectation. So the only consideration that would come up would be if a Prime Minister suddenly decided to give up immediately, or, of course, if we didn't have a Prime Minister, the incumbent died in office. In those circumstances, it does become an issue of, can you have a temporary Prime Minister? But as long as a Prime Minister is prepared to stay in office, they remain Prime Minister until such time as they go to the palace to tender their resignation.
What can the Prime Minister do or not do during this sort of handover period, so to speak? Are there rules in place that prevent him from making any big decisions that will bind his successor, or does he have are there any sort of checks and balances in that regard, or whilst ever he's Prime Minister, does he have a free hand to keep on doing anything he wants to do?
Well, there's the formality. He remains Prime Minister. He has the powers of the leader of government, but the leader of government is always constrained. Don't forget, there are no statutory powers vested in the Prime Minister. Statutory powers rest in individual ministers, secretaries of state. So formally, the Prime Minister can go on being Prime Minister, doing the normal job of a Prime Minister, but is constrained politically by cabinet and the political situation. So in that sense, the Prime Minister would operate within those constraints. He's going to be limited.
The opposition will be agitating for a general election. They will say you need to go to the country, but will the new leader have to do that?
No, there's no constitutional reason for that. As long as the Prime Minister and the government retains the confidence of the House of Commons, it remains in office. So there's no ground for that at all. So if the government were to lose a vote of confidence, that would be different. But as long as it's got a working majority, that's not going to happen. So the constitutional position is a government with a majority can carry on until such time as a Prime Minister, now under the Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act, goes to the palace and requests an early election. But there's no requirement on Prime Minister to do that, because there might be a change of Prime Minister, But we are a parliamentary system, we're not a presidential system. So the Prime Minister is Prime Minister because he commands the majority of the House of Commons. So despite what some people are saying, the Prime Minister doesn't have a direct mandate from the electorate. It's the government that is being formed because the party has a majority of seats in the House of Commons. So it's not at all unusual, as you know, for a change of Prime Minister to take place during the life of a Parliament. So there's no requirement constitutionally for an election. All that happens constitutionally is that somebody takes over as Prime Minister.
Now, Philip, one thing that's getting people hot under the collar, and that is the amount of money that is now going to be handed to ministers who have resigned. So do you think if they're being reinstated, they should not take that money that is given to you once you sort of lose your seat as a minister? What do you think should be done there?
Well, I think that's a fair point to make. And of course, it's something that would now need to be considered, which hasn't been considered before, for the simple reason we've not been in this situation before, where you've had somebody leave government and then be, within a matter of hours or days, be reappointed to it. So it seems a bit perverse to give them a severance for leaving if they rejoin. So one might need to look at that. And of course, ministers, and some have said, well, we're not taking the money, it would go to charity. So, but that certainly needs looking at, yes, because it is a bit perverse for that situation to pertain.
I think that you can see any shocks that we will be mindful of, should be mindful of?
Not shocks, no. I mean, what we're facing is a situation you'll be familiar with before, where a Prime Minister announces they're going, so it becomes a contest for their successor. So in the present circumstances, it's a case of watching more what the 1922 Committee Executive decides in terms of what rules will apply in the present situation, given the pressures of time. And at the moment, of course, given the sheer number of people who are sort of putting their heads above the parapet and suggesting they might wish to be candidates for the leadership. So there is then a consequence from that, the possibility of a long drawn-out election campaign. The key point here is that the constitutional position, the formality, is not kept pace with the political reality, of course, which is nowadays party leaders are elected by the party membership in the country. And of course, that can take quite a period of time. So that ties in with, Boris Johnson saying as Prime Minister, how long will that be? So could you shorten the period? And I think that's one of the things we need to focus on, what the executive of the 1922 committee will decide to do in that respect, and how much it can actually speed up the process so that the issue of who will the new leader be can be resolved fairly quickly.
Lord Philip Norton, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Now, the word manning has been banned at the University of Bristol, where staff and students have been ordered to stay stationed instead.
Guidon also says the term mankind should be replaced with humankind and manpower ditched for workforce.
At the University of Nottingham, staff and students are told not to use phrases like fell on deaf ears or blind spot in case people find them offensive.
Lord knows who finds them offensive, but joining us now is the Director of Academics for Academic Freedom, Professor Dennis Hayes. Dennis, is this kind of nonsense something that's happening at all universities? Are we picking unfairly on Bristol and Nottingham? Could we have found this at every single university across the land?
The answer to that is yes, across the world, I think. When I heard the news items, I thought, this is not news. Now, I've got a book on my shelf by the educational historian Diane Ravitch, which came out in 2003. And it's called, by the way, The Language Police, right? The Language Police. And she, in that book, has an appendix, 13 pages long, which lists words from able-bodied to yes man that have been banned in schools and colleges. And it's a growing list. And, man appears in a lot of those examples. So mankind's there, and you shouldn't say man and wife, but husband and wife. And somebody should tell the soap producers on BBC and ITV, because they use those phrases all the time. But she talks about what the language police aim to do. And it's not just a matter of policing speech just to make you feel uncomfortable, because it makes you feel uncomfortable, actually to police your thoughts. It's an attempt to police what you think, because they believe, the language police, that reality follows language. I'll give you an example, a modern example. One of the words they want to ban is millennial. And I think the word that goes with that is snowflake. So if you ban the word snowflake, the idea is that students will cease to be snowflakes. It's completely absurd, because A, they're not snowflakes, but the institutions encourage them to be snowflakes. And you can deal with these words without banning them. I'll tell you what my students do. I have PhD tutorials, and they come in and they'll say, oh, can I have a snowflake moment? And then they'll tell you that the cat's been ill or whatever, some problem they've got. And then you'll go on with the seminar and the tutorial. So, you can use them and play with them. And I thought, this is
not being funny, but isn't that what breaks are for? Isn't that what you chat with your friends at sort of lunchtime about? You don't stop your lesson to have a chat about what you think's upsetting you a little bit. That is what you do before and you do afterwards. Well, shouldn't you be holding them to account as well and making sure they do the lessons?
I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of academics have capitulated into that. And the line between a therapy session and your tutorials are very thin. Well, I had a friend of mine did his PhD with a Platonist at Liverpool University, and she was a very motherly woman. And he used to go in and she'd say to him, "Are you getting enough to eat?" And he'd say, "Oh, yes, okay." And then she'd cease to demolish him intellectually about everything he'd written and thought. But I think there's something else behind it, that's new. And I was trying to think, why has it come up with this constant obsession with the word man? And it's not to defend men. I think it taps into that argument about there's no such thing as biological sex. So the idea that they can't say there are men or women, that's the most offensive thing you can say if you're in a university. Very brave person to say that. So it's part of that gender identity, ideology that's being permeated. And I thought, well, why are they doing it? And there's very few trans people, and they should, they're right to be trans. But why is every institution obsessed by it? And I think it's because it gives people in that institution moral authority. They seem to be superior to all the ordinary students and staff who believe there are men and women.
Are people not just overthinking when they could be working or doing things? Or we're just not now overthinking and making everything an intellectual argument?
You never get a job if you said things like that in universities. I know somebody went for an interview and they said, "What would you do if students were falling behind?" And the person said, "Well, I'd encourage them to work harder and catch up." Didn't get the job because they weren't student-centred enough in their approach. So it is a difficult world, and the language, policing your language, is just part of that. You can't say various things. But I think students are going. By the way, I think a lot of them do work, but a lot of the work they're set now in certain instances is time wasting rather than productive. And I think
Professor Dennis Hayes, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. But Phil, you can't be doing with any of this, can you?
No, I hate political. In fact, for many years, I was the parliamentary spokesman for the campaign against political correctness. So this really does get my juices flowing. And I certainly wish Dennis Hayes well with his academics for academic freedom. I wish them more power to their elbow. The bit I can't understand is who at the university is sitting down and wasting their time deciding what words you can say and what words you can't say. It's like a committee. It's like a committee. I just envisage there's a sort of a monthly committee, right? On the agenda this week. This word. Are we still allowing this word, or are we banning this word?
I think Dennis alluded to that, didn't he? At the moment, the thought process is anything with man or woman in has to be removed completely. So that's one set of words. So find anything with that in, because we can't talk about that at the moment, because you're not allowed to be a man or a woman. I've got the Scouts here and what words they're taking out. And you can't say, there's no Chinese whispers, that game anymore. It's broken telephone. Right? They've also said with scramble associations across the world, there's 400 words that can't be used now. If you're playing Scrabble, things like Fatso, Boffing and Wrinklies cannot be used. And I believe the 2 times British world champion and British champion, Craig Beavers, has said this is ruining the game. It is ruining life, not just the game.
Well, the thing is, they tie themselves up in knots because they say, well, you can't say anything man and woman, you know, so you can't have chairman and you can't have this. But then what they do is they get themselves right tied up because they say, we're not having chairman, you're a chairperson. You're a chairperson. And then you say, well, hold on a minute, the word person ends in son. So where does that leave us? I mean, should we be a chair per daughter? Or I just don't. You tie yourself up in knots with all this rubbish.
At a debate in Parliament, people come over to me and say, "Oh, can I call you just chair?" So I'm a chair.
You're an inanimate.
I'm not even
You're an inanimate
person,
object.
a man or a woman. I'm now just a chair.
I know it's ridiculous. Well, you can't even say ladies.
I think we've got to ask.
You can't say ladies anymore. By the way, you're not allowed to say ladies anymore.
Well, I do, and I'm going to carry on saying it.
When you start a speech,
ladies, what are you going to do about that?
When you say I'm going to the ladies, you're not allowed to say that anymore. Please let us know what you think about all this PC stuff. We'd love to hear your views. As ever, gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews.
And dare you break the rules? Are you still going to say
Are you a rule breaker?
Are you I'm a rule breaker. I've just realised I'm a rule breaker.
Coming up after the break, we'll be joined in the studio by 2 guests to discuss government plans for 50-year mortgages and whether they will help ease the ongoing housing crisis.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. We've got some of your views here about what's happening, who the next leader should be. Philip.
John says we know all the resignations, but how many of the Tory MPs still support Boris? Couldn't he stand for election, make the final 2, and then he would have a major chance of being re-elected by the Tory membership?
I did say that at the time, actually, as I was listening to his resignation speech. I said, is he going to run? Is he going to run again?
And Sarah and Clive say, as a member of the party, I can tell you the Conservatives have just committed electoral suicide. They'll lose power at the next election and richly deserve to do so.
Paul says, I see that as a Remainer plot to get a Remainer in charge. They were behind Boris's downfall from the start. Boris did not help himself, though, from day one. And Remainers and the Remain press, BBC, has to be, is what's got him out. And whoever comes next has to be a Brexiteer.
And Kyle says, God, I hope Rishi and the top contenders do not get voted in. They are more of the same. Kemi Badenoch is a no-nonsense, real Conservative. she is what we need right now. So thank you for your views.
Yes, but what the government is doing at the moment is exploring the idea of tackling the country's housing crisis with the ultra-long, some of us will think, mortgages of up to 50 years.
The mortgages would, in theory, pass between generations and allow people to build up equity rather than pay rent.
Experts have said the idea could bring some benefits, but have highlighted certain problems, with some saying the plan would not tackle the fundamental issue of housing supply.
Well, join us now to discuss the plan is writer Jack Anderton and business commentator Justin Urquhart-Stewart. So, Justin, how would these mortgages work, and is this a good thing for young people?
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's the next best idea. But if you could have lifetime mortgages, there's nothing particularly new about it. But of course, what you're doing is changing the purpose, because now you're making sure people have debt for the whole of their life to pass on an asset to the next generation coming through. There's an alternative to this. We used to have longer-term leases with assurance, whereby actually the money you would have spent on paying off your mortgage goes into other things, such as pensions and those elements. Still gets spent, gets saved, all those issues, but it means you're not tied to this mortgage for the whole of your life, or maybe even pay it off just before you die. So I've worked all that, now I've got 2 years owning my house. It's not a good way of doing it.
Now, if you did go down this line, we had a 50-year mortgage, and I think they do long mortgages in places like Japan, don't they? I think they've had even 100 year ones, even longer ones. What I don't understand is, and perhaps you might be able to explain, is if at the moment, people buy the house, and then at the end of their life they might go into a care home, and they're expected in effect to pay for their care with the assets that they've got.
Yep.
With this system, if the idea was that this house was going to be passed down to the next generation, would people still be expected to pay for their care home fees out of their assets, or would that be off the table?
Well, it might well be off the table, because actually you think a person actually doing the lending, suddenly finding actually what they're using as their security for it actually isn't there. It's gone somewhere else. It's now owned by the bank or wherever it happens to be. So you're losing that flexibility. Come back to the point, is at your time of life, then you need extra cash built up over time to see you through the last few years of your life. If you've got a 50, 70-year mortgage, that's actually, you'll find yourself in the wrong position where you need to actually have access to more cash.
So what would you say is the best way to solve the housing crisis? People do want to own their own homes. What is it that fundamentally has to be done so there's affordable homes for the next generation of people?
There's not enough houses.
And that's fundamentally it. It's housing supply. I know people are saying get clever with mortgages and ideas, and the bank should be coming up with more ideas, but really it's just build more houses.
That's the basic element to it. And also we do have this fixation. Property only goes up. No. We've actually seen some very difficult times where people suddenly find that they want to remortgage. They no longer qualify for the mortgage because of various rules. So now you're stuck. You have to sell the property at the wrong moment because you can't remortgage. And this particularly applies to people sort of in their 20s and 30s, where they've got a big mortgage to try and pay. The rates change. They find themselves in a difficult position. So, again, I suppose one of the elements, you come back to the need for education on this, because we take out a mortgage because that's what you do. But how much can you afford over that time? How is it going to change if interest rates go up significantly? And so we need more understanding of this. It's not just about mortgages, it's about managing your money from naught till you find it gone.
So I'm wondering, and I'll turn to you, Jack, on this, is home ownership a thing of the past? I mean, why bother if it's going to be a 100-year mortgage, you're passing it on, you're only young yourself, but you're going to be passing it on to your kids and your kids' kids. Well, why bother? Why don't you just rent?
I mean, I think the thing is with house ownership is it gives young people an asset and a stake in society and in the nation and in the economy. So if you don't own anything, if you don't have a stake in the nation of which you are born and you live in, what reason do you have to be productive? What reason do you have to be loyal to that nation? So I think home ownership, I mean, Justin is right, we absolutely need to build more homes. You referenced Japan, they have a 50-year and longer mortgages. The average mortgage in Japan is 35 years, so it really hasn't been picked up. I'm
going to ask you there, because you got really quite passionate then when you said, I want a stake in the country. I want to feel I belong here, and it will give me a sense of purpose. So I want to really investigate that a little bit more. So what would you do if you didn't feel you had a stake in the country? Or how else could you get a stake in the country?
Well, I mean, I think lots of people my age are definitely considering emigrating to countries where housing is more affordable and where they can raise families. The problem of housing, it affects everything. So the reason why we have, population crisis and fertility crisis is that couples are not being able to afford homes to be able to have children in. So if you can't build a family, if you can't build the next generation of your country.
So you don't feel you've got stability? You don't feel you've got foundation, and you'll fly the nest
It's not
elsewhere?
stability, it's not productivity, you're not being able to save for, luxuries or anything like that because all of your money is going on rent.
So would you be tempted by one of these if these came on the market? Would you be saying to your parents, let's get going with this? This is a cracking way of getting me on the housing ladder.
I wouldn't, because I think it's sort of generational servitude, generational slavery to big capital. Ultimately, this sort of 50-year policy it's not papering over the cracks, it's widening the cracks. It will simply inflate house prices. This policy is a pro-capital, anti-youth policy, and ultimately it's like a lot of other housing policies that the government have put forward.
So have you got some policies you'd like to see? Because I don't disagree with you, actually, and I think Justin was in the same place. You're locked in. I mean, what are you buying your house for, in a way? You're not really going to enjoy it. You're just a slave to paying in a mortgage. So what would you do to help solve the crisis?
Well, reduce immigration. Immigration was at 1 million legally a year last year, and that's not counting the illegal immigration. And we would also repeal the Town and Country Planning Act of 1947 and the updated 1990 version, which basically hamstrung developers and people wishing to build their own houses. So we would relax the planning system, which the Conservatives did try to do, but then they had much backlash from their voters and their members, so that was dropped. But that would be the only solution, would be to massively build a lot more homes.
And when you talk about this sort of immigration issue, how would you deal with that then? Because that is viewed as a contentious issue. What would you do?
I mean, completely reduce it to about 50,000 a year.
And you think that this is what we'll need, to stabilise the country, to make the country sort of happier, to get sort of the younger people invested in our country?
Absolutely. I think it's not sustainable if you have 1 million people coming into your country a year and you're building 220,000 homes a year. It's completely unsustainable.
Jack, I'm delighted that because I'm usually a lone voice in this. People always talk about supply. There isn't enough supply. They never talk about demand for housing. And I'm delighted that you've mentioned the immigration, which is the biggest single demand on more housing.
Do you know why I'm glad, though, we're having this conversation and talking like this? Because for so long on so many channels, you haven't been able to talk about the supply, the demand, the upset, the feeling left out. And this is just really important. It's not saying this is the solution. It's saying, but we need to talk about the component parts and not just offer up a 100-year mortgage, which won't solve anything.
And I think this is important as well for the upcoming leadership contenders. They absolutely should be talking about immigration and the immigration levels in this country.
And who would you therefore be voting for?
Nobody at the minute. I think it's sort of a battle between the Blairites, the warmongers, and the fools. So that is my sort of analysis of the current candidates.
Justin, I was thinking that what Jack said about that this was, sort of an anti-youth policy, not a pro-youth policy. And I was thinking to myself as I was thinking, I thought, this does actually sound great for people who are older, because I could take out a mortgage over 50 years instead of 25 years. So I'm thinking roughly...
Knowing you're not going to be here.
Well, exactly. So I'm thinking roughly...
Who's going to be left with it?
Roughly, that's halving my mortgage. That's halving my mortgage payment each month, isn't it? So then I've got then half the rest of the money to spend on enjoying myself or whatever, instead of at the minute not being able to afford to enjoy myself because of the mortgage. And so I think that I'm sort of beginning to think that I'm with Jack on this. This isn't a pro-youth policy. This is a pro-older person's policy, because it's halving their mortgage payment.
Like most policies.
He's chipping in here from the sidelines. Like most policies.
Pro-olds Absolutely. This country serves the older generation.
And not the young
and not
people.
the younger generation.
Do you think, Justin, that this is an older person?
Oh, it certainly is. I mean,
Right.
look at all the issues you've got.
I'm now warming to it. I didn't like the policy at all before, but now I'm warming to it for old people.
We can have our mortgage payments.
Jack, can I adopt you, Jack? Can I adopt you, and then you can carry on with my mortgage payment?
I think it's an interesting policy. But thank you, Jack.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
My
pleasure.
For joining us. So we've now got our future sorted.
We
We've
have
got our future
indeed.
sorted now. Didn't realise it was happening. Now, latest figures from the ONS have shown that COVID infections are rising once again across the UK, with an estimated 1 in 30 people now having the virus.
2 new fast-spreading subvariants of Omicron are said to be driving the rise, and health experts are again advising anyone over 75 who has not had a vaccine or a booster in the past 6 months to get one.
Do we actually think that there's a problem with COVID?
Well, I haven't come across it, and the people who I do know who've got it, so this massive surge that is meant to be happening, I can't say I'm seeing it myself, or at least that they're not feeling that ill at the moment. Anyway, Phil.
Joining us now to discuss the current situation is immunologist Professor Dennis Kinane. Dennis, is there a problem with rising COVID infections? Should we all be panicking?
Certainly, we shouldn't panic. We should never panic. But there is a rise in numbers. There's a lot more people infected than there were at this time. There was something like last year, same month, it was 160. 1 in 160 people were affected. This right now, it's in places such as Scotland and Wales. It's as much as 1 in 20, and actually worse than that. So approximately 5% of people are actually suffering from COVID at this present point in time, and that will have an effect on the hospitals, and it will actually endanger many people.
Vaccinated, or vast majority of the population have been vaccinated. I thought the whole point of the vaccination was that, therefore, I mean, it wasn't really killing many people before we had the vaccine, so it's going to be killing even fewer infections. I mean, I might get the cold next week. It's not going to do me any great harm, is it? So why should we care?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to understand that there have been a tremendous number of people died from COVID and also died, related to COVID. There are a lot of susceptible people out there, and our hospitals, once the hospitals are full, then really we don't have an opportunity to then treat other diseases which can also kill. So there's been a big rise in mortality over this whole period, and I think we've got to take it seriously. And none of us want to go back into lockdown. None of us want to, restrict as much as what we had to do during lockdowns. But I think we've got to be cautious right now. There is a rise. It's much worse than we actually thought. And just because we want there to not be a pandemic doesn't mean that there will be no pandemic. I mean, we're actually in a situation where the numbers are, serious, and I think we've got to take it seriously. I think
you're the chief medical officer at Signpost Diagnostics. What does Signpost Diagnostics actually do?
We actually do a variety of tests, medical tests, including COVID tests. What we've been doing recently is a lot less COVID tests, as you can imagine, and the airports are not requiring testing, etc. So, but we're still,
So this is your commercial interest, really. That's
we'd say a vested interest in Parliament. We'd have to declare before we started telling people we want to do more testing. We'd have to declare that.
Anyway, Professor Dennis Kinane, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sorry we ran short, but we're very grateful for you joining us.
Yeah, and that's it for the first hour here on Saturday morning with Esther and Phil. But don't go anywhere, because we're about to have a cracking second hour. That's what we've got lined up for you, some really good interviews. So see you then.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
we don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning. That was a lively first hour, wasn't it? And welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Philip. Coming up on the show in this hour, which is going to be just as lively.
We'll be joined by a political gambling expert to discuss the current leadership odds following the Prime Minister's resignation this week.
We'll also be joined by a contestant from one of the most bizarre shows on British television. Yes, Naked Attraction. But don't worry, this is a morning show, so clothes will firmly remain on. Few says, Philip.
Yeah, all of that plus much more after your latest headlines with Alice.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The race to become the new Prime Minister is gathering pace. Former Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch is the latest to throw her hat into the ring. The MP for Saffron Walden says she supports lower taxes and a tight budget. It comes after Rishi Sunak announced his bid for Tory leader. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is also expected to run. Defence Select Committee member Mark Francois told GB News he has a clear vision of what he wants to see.
If we want companies from around the globe to invest in Britain, which we do, increasing the rate of corporation tax that they would have to pay is a disincentive rather than an incentive. So personally, I'd like to see whoever wins give a commitment to reducing corporation tax rather than increasing it.
The Defence Secretary insists the British government remains totally committed to helping the Ukrainian war effort, and that won't change after Boris Johnson is replaced as Prime Minister. Ben Wallace, who's seen as a key contender in the leadership contest, was speaking as he visited a British Army training camp where thousands of Ukrainian soldiers are being trained before returning to the front line. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, reports.
They are the familiar sounds of battle, but these Ukrainian troops are thousands of miles from the dangers of the front line. They are the first of at least 10,000 new recruits to the Ukrainian armed forces who are being trained here in the UK by the British military.
We're working on getting you some Ukrainian uniform rather than using the British one.
Checking on their progress, the UK Defence Secretary. He knows these Ukrainian troops and their countrymen and women back home are extremely grateful for the support and leadership Boris Johnson's government has provided. That level of commitment will remain, he says, whoever becomes the new British Prime Minister.
Britain is full square behind them. And, the assistance to Ukraine we give is not just one person. We're not me, not the Prime Minister. It's the whole effort. We've got the British Army up here today, up in the north of England, training Ukrainians on what it needs to do. It's got people in Poland and in Estonia standing by our NATO colleagues. That's the reality, is that, you know, actions matter in all of this. And, you know, while the Prime Minister will be incredibly sad to leave this post, he has led from the front on Ukraine, but the whole of the political system is supportive of what we're doing in Ukraine. I don't expect that to finish at all.
Once the fresh mag's on, you're going to cop the weapon system again.
The UK has already provided £1.3 billion in support for Ukraine and supplied thousands of anti-tank missiles, artillery and other equipment. For the Ukrainian recruits here, even just a few weeks training with the British Army is highly valuable.
I believe we're here to share the experience and receive British experience from the soldiers, to receive proper trainings from our trainers, and just combine that and receive the best and most valuable skills.
It's very important to combine our military experience with your standards, UK Army, and compare and make our soldier better.
Most of these recruits left ordinary jobs in Ukraine to defend their country. Many had never handled weapons before the conflict, but their British training officers say they can't fault their motivation and commitment.
They're very, very motivated. It's really impressive to see. So with quite high ambitions in terms of the training, expecting to have to scale back, but the level that they're at is incredible. They've met the expectations, if not more.
The battle for number 10 has barely even begun. But in the weeks ahead, all of the candidates will be keen to reassure the government in Kyiv that Britain's support in their fight against Russian aggression is unwavering, whoever gets the top job. Mark White, GB News.
A serving Metropolitan Police officer has been charged with rape. Special Constable Paul Hoyle was arrested in Essex on Wednesday following an alleged attack near Newport in Shropshire. He's been suspended from the force and will appear at Kidderminster Magistrates Court later today. Sri Lanka's Prime Minister has called an emergency meeting of party leaders following anti-government demonstrations in the country. Thousands of protesters stormed the president's official residence in the capital in the latest escalation of political unrest. Police fired water cannon and tear gas at demonstrators who are demanding a change in regime as the country sees its worst economic crisis in more than 70 years. The man accused of assassinating former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is being transferred to the prosecutor's office. The country's longest-serving leader was shot during an election campaign while he was giving a speech. Police, who are still trying to establish a motive, have admitted there was a lapse in security. A motorcade carrying his body has now arrived at his Tokyo home. Elon Musk has pulled out of his £36 billion deal to buy Twitter. The Tesla CEO claims there were multiple breaches of the agreement by the social media company. The billionaire announced he was buying Twitter in April, but he says he's now backing out because it failed to provide enough information on the number of spam and fake accounts. 6 people have been taken to hospital after the bull run in Pamplona. At least 2 runners were gored in the leg. The famous annual event in Spain attracts thousands of people, but more injuries are reported on the weekend as it's harder for people to run with larger crowds. 4 people were taken to hospital due to concussions and injuries due to falls. Muslims have celebrated Eid in Saudi Arabia as part of the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Marking the first day of the festival, Muslims have been performing a symbolic ritual by throwing stones at columns symbolising the devil. Saudi Arabia says up to 1 million pilgrims, mostly from abroad, will attend the Hajj season this year, after a 2-year break due to the pandemic when only Saudi residents attended. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Esther and Philip.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Philip. We've got a fantastic hour of TV and radio lined up for you today. Coming up,
We will be joined in the studio by a political gambling expert to go through the odds of all the contestants to take over the top job from Boris Johnson.
And it's surely the most outrageous show in British television.
Not ours.
We will be joined by a contestant from Naked Attraction to discuss what it's really like to appear on the show that bears all.
And loads of you have been getting in touch already. We want to hear more from you. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, then email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. Before all of that, though, we are joined again in the studio by Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. So, what have you seen in the papers today? I know it's pretty much more of the same, but what have you seen?
Well, I mean, nearly all of it that we're covering is obviously the politics. But I think that there was an interesting story which shows that, as distracting as the leadership contest is, there's real problems to deal with, which is the news about energy bills. The energy price cap is set to rise relatively soon. It's being controlled by the government, and it's going to rise to apparently about £3,000 or more pounds a year. Now, for many families all around the UK, that means that all of a sudden there's going to be a huge impact on their daily finances. And it shows that whilst it's fun for us to cover the leadership, who's up, who's down, the odds that you're going to get in a little bit, there are really serious problems here that the politicians are going to have to tackle.
Yeah, and they need to be reading those headlines too to know what they're going to have to say will be their number one policy to be the leader of the country. Is anybody making the right sounds for you on that?
I honestly haven't heard anyone talking about the cost of living crisis yet. They've said the words cost of living crisis, but nobody's really come up with a suite of policies on it. They're talking about tax cuts and so on, which is good for the Conservative Party base. But for me, as a party member and therefore a voter in this contest, I want to see somebody with a clear, explicit plan for what they're going to do to support household finances.
And it's here in the Mirror, page 10, energy bills on track to hit £3,300 a year by January, and they're going to surge by another 64% in October to over £3,200 a year.
But I don't know how you get that money. If you haven't got it, I mean, where do you... That's a substantial amount of money.
I mean, some people are really going to struggle to pay the bill. So I guess the question is tax cuts the way to do it, to put more money into people's pockets so that they can afford to pay higher bills? Is it taking off the green levies off the bills? Is it taking VAT off bills in order to get them or is it a combination of all of these things to make them
I think when things are this serious, you should be looking at absolutely everything. Take VAT off. Tax cuts, I think the important thing is that they need to be carefully targeted. If you've got a limited amount of room with which to cut taxes, the tax cuts should be targeted at the low paid and the less well off. Obviously, the Conservatives usually like to cut taxes for everyone, but I think at a time of national stringency, it's right that we focus on people who, as you say, will be put in very difficult situation by these bills.
But equally, you could look at people who've been sucked into a higher tax bracket, who weren't before, who are now losing a lot more money, who'd say, I've got a bigger family, I've got a bigger mortgage, my outgoings were bigger because I thought I had more money. So I think you've got to look at all of that. But, you can't save money on your heating over the summer because most of us don't have it on over the summer. I mean, it's a really difficult time. It's going to be a whack when you put the heating back on. So cost of living definitely is number one and how we're going to support people. I'm going to go to a completely different story here, and this is in the Mirror today, and it's love after loss. Now, they've written this, and we've got various couples in who found love after their first husband or wife died, and they talk about that. I mean, whether you should, whether you could, whether you feel guilty, how you make that person, how you do move on. And I guess it's on the back of Damian Lewis there, the actor whose wife, Helen McCrory, died earlier this year from cancer, and his new relationship. But it's interesting what people say there. And how do you move on? And do you feel guilty? What does your family think? Or are you... when is it too soon to fall in love again? What do either of you think about this?
I thought it was interesting on the person there said, I felt like I was cheating at first when I first started. I mean, you must have mixed emotions, mustn't you, Henry?
Oh, no, absolutely. It's a horrible situation to be in. I think that if ever I'm lucky enough to get married, given my current lifestyle choices, this will be a challenge for my partner to surmount rather than me, though.
And Deborah James there, obviously, the wonderful lady who was the campaigner against bowel cancer, she urged her husband to find love again. They had that time at the end to say, well, how are you going to move on? What are you going to do? And in that way, I guess you've got a blessing to go forward. But it's always
Still doesn't make it easy, does it?
It still doesn't make it easy, and you have still got the family there to consider.
I'm back on cost of living.
Oh?
Cost of living, because this is
got
good.
the cost of love, and now we're on to the cost of living.
This is good news for me. I don't know if you're a beans on toast man, Henry. Are you a beans on toast man? But
alas, no. But
page 11 of the Mirror. Celebrations are Heinz products are back on the shelves at Tesco after talks resolved the bust-up over steep price rises. So they've come to an agreement about prices. So now you can go back into Tesco and get your Heinz baked beans. I could live on beans on toast. I almost do live on beans on toast. The bad news...
by the way, that's nothing against my cooking, by the way. I don't want him to think that, but that is genuinely what he likes.
I like beans on... But I thought the bad thing about this is that the beans are back on the shelf just as Lurpaks hit £9.50 a pack. So the key thing here, don't have butter on your toast, Henry. You're going to have to eat it without the butter on because you can't afford the butter. You might be able to afford the beans now.
Or the cheese, if you like a slice of cheese on top.
Is Lurpak actually butter? I thought Lurpak was one of those sort of pseudo-butter products.
No, I think it's butter without the salt.
Oh, is that
it's now a luxury product, I'll tell you now.
Well, isn't it worrying that we're in a position where we actually have negotiations between food brands on pricing? It's absolutely bizarre.
Yeah. And this is where I think the supermarkets are trying to do a lot, keeping the prices down, saying to Tesco that wasn't good enough, and also giving people menu cards. How can you do something cheap? What can you do? What are we going to do to try and help everyone?
On a food front, I just want to mention this. It says here in the Sun, it must be true, it's in the Sun, page 22, greasy bar gum, Yorkshire tops the poll of kebab scoffing regions. It says, no, I can't believe this. It says here that around 1 in 3 people in Yorkshire scoff a kebab every day. Every day, not that they're eating it every day, but every day, 1 in 3 people in Yorkshire are eating a kebab. Now, I can't believe that can't possibly be true, can it?
I'm not familiar enough with Yorkshire to know, but you would, so I'll take your word for it. It seems an extraordinary number, because it implies that each of them are eating 2 or 3
How many do you eat?
I actually can't remember the last time I had one, because I tend to be very drunk.
Well, that's it, isn't it? You only tend to eat a kebab when you're drunk.
It's 2 a.m. food.
I can't believe every day 30% of people in Yorkshire are eating a kebab.
Henry, we've got a new guest who's just arrived in with us, but you can stay because I'd like you to maybe have some views on that. But since the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, announced his resignation on Thursday, the big question has been who will replace him in 10 Downing Street, with candidates throwing their hat in the ring, and speculation is running rife as to who will lead the country at such an important moment for the UK.
Well, join us now to discuss the odds and who is currently favourite to take over from Boris Johnson is political betting analyst at Star Sports, William Kajani. William, thank you for joining us. Is this a big betting contest, the leadership of the Conservative Party?
It's a massive betting contest. We always have interest in party leadership elections, and given that there had been speculation for so long, it really has exploded over the last week. We've seen lots of movers and shakers.
And so who's the favourite?
The favourite currently is Rishi Sunak, and he's really jumped to quite a high point in our market. He was as big as 5-1 earlier in the week. He's now 15-8 favourite. He's actually dramatically usurped Ben Wallace, who had been quite short because of his very impressive YouGov polling.
Now, is that because of the weight of money that you've seen at Star Sports, or is it because you've been impressed with the number, with the Ready for Rishi video and the number of people who've come out in support of him? What's made that big difference in the odds?
A bit of both, really. I think we have seen quite a bit of money for Rishi Sunak. He's also a previous liability for us because for a long time people had presumed he was the guy to take over. He's been favourite in that market for a long time, so he started from a strong position.
Well, Henry, I'm going to ask you, what do you think of those figures, those odds that we've just heard there?
Well, I think it's early days. I think this contest is wide open, and I imagine that given that bettors only have as much information as we do, it will go up and down. Rishi's had a very strong start. He has a very strong machine. Ben Wallace possibly doesn't have a machine, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ben launches to see those odds change again.
Lots of people are saying that we don't even know who some of the people are. Are you hearing that when people are saying, who are they?
Yes.
So some of the contestants lower down, even who might have been in Cabinet or a minister, people just don't know them.
Indeed, and it's always important to remember that we live and breathe all this, but political recognition of senior figures in politics actually doesn't stretch that far outside Westminster in some cases. Boris Johnson is an exception to the rule. He was soon to be a very famous Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak has broken that mould, I think, due to the pandemic and the amount of attention on him. But plenty of these names will be unknowns relative to the general public, and you see that actually in their impressions in the polling.
Is there any smart money and any lively outsider? You know, a Suella Braverman or Kemi Badenoch? Have we seen any smart money for any of the lesser-known people in the field?
The early smart money was Tom Tugendhat, which personally I was pretty happy to take on. I think I think a One Nation Tory, I hope I'm using that correctly, Henry, but I think a One Nation Tory is somebody from that side of the party. They might struggle against the membership. Obviously, we don't know the exact numbers, but I'm presuming it still leans pretty heavily to those in the centre and the right of the party. So happy to take on Tugendhat, but there was smart money for him. And also, we did see a lot of money for Steve Baker, who, of course, has jumped out. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw money for Kemi Badenoch. I think one of the things that Henry correctly pointed out is just throwing your hat in the ring, it is enough to move the political betting markets.
Now, one thing that Philip raised there, because this is how they got the voting so wrong for Brexit, they looked at the amount of money that was being put on, which was big individual amounts of money, but they didn't look at the number of bets, which could have been considerably smaller. And it was the smaller bets which were actually winning the day, and that's how Brexit got done. But they were just looking at large but smaller numbers of donations. What's happening here?
So what we're seeing is a pretty good sized bet numbers. It is really a smaller bet so far. We're seeing what I think people would say are decent amounts staked, but we haven't yet had the sort of big sizable market moving wager. That said, when the voting gets going with MPs and when we see more candidates being endorsed, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a larger size of bet.
Henry, who's your money on?
Well, I haven't put any money on. My record on political betting is abysmal.
Well, William would be delighted to meet you in that case.
You always like to start sports in that case.
But I would probably, at this point, I'd hazard a bet on Ben Wallace, I think. I think he'll be underpriced at the moment.
And what price is Ben Wallace?
5-1 with Star Sports. I'm inclined to agree.
There you go, 5-1.
I'll chat
Fill your boots. The thing is, I'll tell you what the interesting thing I think about political betting. I remember, I think it was Chris Huhne when he stood for the leadership of the Lib Dems. His supporters were backing him to shorten the odds to actually build momentum in his campaign. And actually, it was quite an effective way of building, you know, because people always say, oh, the bookmakers, they know what's going on. I mean, they don't always, but they, you know, and so actually, it's quite interesting to see how some people use betting and the betting markets to try and build the momentum behind their campaign.
Yes, that's been something that's happened in politics for quite a long time. And again, we do get smart money. We do get some Westminster money as well. And I wouldn't be surprised, you know, if some campaigns did jump on a movement in the odds. It's still something people do today, albeit not quite as memorably as that.
William, thank you very much for joining us, and keep us up to date with the latest market moves, because we want to know where the smart money's going. Henry, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and you can now sort out your bet on Ben Wallace at 5-1.
Really, hang around after.
Yeah, exactly.
But coming up on the show, we'll be joined by lawyer and broadcaster Andrew Eborn to discuss the biggest stories from the legal world this week. Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back. Your views are coming in thick and fast. And I'll tell you, the university conversation we had about woke words and woke universities got Andrew all of a doodah. And he says, have they gone completely mad? They should be teaching, not preaching. This is utter nonsense from a generation that will destroy humanity with all this rubbish. And that's all the woke words you're allowed to say.
But Geraldine had some good news.
Oh, yes.
She said, yesterday I went to my daughter's graduation at Bristol University. Congratulations to your daughter, Geraldine. And the speaker introduced themselves with, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So it seems the woke memo wasn't received there. Great news.
Fantastic. Ladies. Now, we've got Stephen here. We were talking about COVID and the increase in COVID cases. And Stephen said that it doesn't matter one jot how many catch COVID. What is important is the death rate. I am 74 and had COVID about 4 weeks ago. Yes, I was tired and weak for a few days. And now I'm fine. My wife caught it from me. Well, she's not going to be thanking you for that. And she had no effects at all. People die every day from a variety of reasons. We can't hide away at home and never go out again. That's Stephen.
And John says, at last someone has said what is so obvious. The way to cure the housing problem is to reduce immigration. I'm so pleased that it was a young person who had the guts to say it. So thank you for your views.
Well, we're now joined in the studio to talk about some bizarre stories this week. As if, like, there wasn't lots of bizarre stories this week. But this time it's from the legal world, and it's our friend of the show, Andrew Eborn. So, as I said, it's been a strange old week in the world of politics, but you've got a strange old week in the world of the legal profession too.
Absolutely. We talk about unprecedented times. It's been an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented, is what I would say. And one of the big headlines this week is about Elon Musk. As we say, he's pulled out of his £44 billion deal to buy Twitter. And what he said is basically that they're in breach of a number of the conditions of the agreement, not least about the number of people that have got spam accounts. What Twitter are saying is only 5% of their people have spam accounts. Elon Musk is saying it should be about 20%, but he's not getting all the right facts and figures. And so there's a big battle going on in a way that a carpetbagger might do when you're haggling over the price of a carpet. So Twitter last week said, oh, hang on, we get rid of about 1 million spam accounts every single day. The chief exec, Parag Agrawal, he basically defended the company process. And in response, a very mature response from Elon Musk, he put a little poo emoji to say, so there is that battle going on.
Was Elon Musk ever serious about buying Twitter? Was it a publicity stunt? Was it to try and get the price up originally and then trade out of it or something? What?
All very good points. And some people sort of said that it was going to be a present to his ex, Amber Heard, so he got rid of all the bad tweets A terrible suggestion, obviously. No, I think he was serious. And I think he still is serious because he wants to loosen Twitter's content restrictions. He wants to loosen... Remember, famously, Donald Trump is no longer a Twitter user. But when Elon Musk was going to buy it, the first thing he said, well, I'll get Trump back and allow freedom of speech. I think what's going to happen, and this is what happens normally in these sort of cases, is that it's a negotiation. The price has dropped terribly since the $54.20 per share, which he was offering originally to give it that massive valuation of the $44 billion. It's down to about $36 since I last checked. And a lot of tech stocks, they've got about 45% down because of the pandemic. Normally what happens is they do this as a negotiation. It's a carpetbagger's haggle, if you like. And that happened. There's a case for this. So Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy Louis Vuitton, the world's leading luxury consumer brand, they did this when they were talking about buying Tiffany's. And they basically renegotiated the price down $425 million, big sale, big bargain, for $15.8 billion they bought Tiffany's for in the end. So I reckon, you heard it here first, it's a haggle. He will buy it. It will go through an interesting time.
And I think there is a couple of interesting points to draw out there because it is difficult to try and fathom out what is the price worth of something like Twitter. Certain things you might automatically know what you're selling, what it is, as you said, how many followers it's got. But in this, there probably was a lot of unknowns. But I will go back to that point again, and maybe he was deliberately putting out fake news in the media to see, well, was it true or not? But there was, going back in April, and I followed it then, and I listened to a business journalist at the time saying he never thought he would buy this. He thought it was a load of rubbish. It was about destabilisation. It was about getting back for Trump and all this. And it was all to do with that number you talked about. You said $54.20, but it was the £4.20. It was also done in April, the 20th of April, $4.20. And this is meant to be a number, meant to be a trope, meant to be a joke about marijuana. This is nonsense. It's a joke. It'll go up in a puff of smoke, or I'd be doing this when I was off my head. And it was meant to be, as you said, a joke or what have you for his girlfriend. So he could be playing it either way. Maybe it never was real, or maybe it is, but he is muddying the water so they won't know. So he is trying to push the price down, as anybody would who's buying something. Well, you trade and barter in every profession.
Of course you do. And there's a lot of history in Delaware courts. A couple of things that may happen.
But could he be sued? That's what I want. So this is the interesting bit. Yeah. He thought he could do this, get away with that, say he never had all the information. They're now saying, we gave you as much, we're going to sue you.
Absolutely. And there are two things that could happen. Delaware court, they could go along, Twitter could go along and get what's called specific performance. In other words, force him to do the deal at $44 billion. You're giving a discount for him. What happens, however, they could also, there's a break clause saying that if he walked away for other reasons, but he couldn't find the finance or whatever, it's a $1 billion break clause. What normally happens, and I mentioned this beforehand, in a Delaware court, you would do that. And one of two things would happen. The parties would either negotiate the deal down a bit, or they would agree a break clause. If there's a fundamental material breach, which is what he's alleging, because of the wrong information, he also said lots of hiring and firing of first-class people have disappeared in breach of some of the assets of the company. So he's arguing multiple breaches. If he could walk away for nothing, then that's one way of doing it. But I still think it's a negotiation.
The thing that I think entertains me about all this is that, if I think that, Twitter's terrible for taking people off unfairly and whatever, I complain about it. I might write to them if I felt particularly exercised about it. Elon Musk, I'm going to buy the company. I mean, how the other half live, eh? I mean, the way to actually, if you're unhappy about the way a company does, it's like that old, was it Remington?
Hey, Ros, I'm just Remington. I like the company so much I bought it.
I hate the company so much I bought it. It's the exact opposite of Remington.
But he's publicly complained about freedom of speech. He views himself as a free speech absolutist. He wants to be the champion of this. And his Twitter feed, he's got 100 million Twitter followers himself, is all full of him talking about the joys of socks and colourful socks and things like that, rather than about this deal. But it is an extraordinary time. But I do think, as I say, it's a negotiation.
Well, he's taken the company down a notch or two, whether it's to buy it or whether it's not. Andrew, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Again, probing the legal world for you, and that is a #1 story at the moment.
Coming up, we'll be catching up on all the latest stories from the world of sport and showbiz with our regulars Hayley and Aidan. But first, here are the latest headlines with Alice.
It's 11:32. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The race to become the new Prime Minister is gathering pace. Former Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch is the latest to throw her hat into the ring. The MP for Saffron Walden says she supports lower taxes and a tight budget. It comes after Rishi Sunak announced his bid for Tory leader. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is also expected to run. Ukrainian soldiers have started a new training programme in the UK to help them win the war against Russia. British troops will train up to 10,000 Ukrainians at sites across the country. It's being run by the Ministry of Defence, which says it will give volunteer recruits the necessary skills to fight on the front line. A serving Metropolitan Police officer has been charged with rape. Special Constable Paul Hoyle was arrested in Essex on Wednesday following an alleged attack near Newport in Shropshire. He's been suspended from the force and will appear at Kidderminster Magistrates Court later. Sri Lanka's Prime Minister has called an emergency meeting of party leaders following anti-government demonstrations in the country. Thousands of protesters stormed the president's official residence in the latest escalation of political unrest. Police fired water cannon and tear gas at demonstrators who are demanding a change in regime. And 6 people have been taken to hospital after the annual bull run in Pamplona. The event in Spain attracts thousands of people. 2 people were gored and 4 others were taken to hospital due to concussions and injuries after falling. TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks very much, Alice. It's time to take a look at the week's showbiz and sports news. And in the studio, we're joined by our regular showbiz correspondent, Hayley Palmer, and sports broadcaster, Aidan McGee. Aidan, it's the ladies' Wimbledon final today, isn't it? So we ought to start with tennis and Wimbledon, and of course, a Brit getting through to the semi-final, which was
that was fantastic yesterday.
He
was so fast out the blocks, Cam Norrie. 3 breaks in that first set, if I remember rightly. It was certainly at least 2, but just bit by bit, Djokovic just reeled him in that second, third and fourth set and ran out a comfortable winner in the end. But nonetheless, a brilliant performance by Cameron Norrie. I saw him 3 years ago in Eastbourne. I wasn't necessarily sure that he was going to go particularly far in the sport.
Why was that? How could you spot his talent then?
Because, I don't know, you just get used to a player's presence on the course. Oh, sorry, on the course. What am I about? That's golf, isn't it? I'm as bad as some of these politicians confusing sports. But
they're blaming us.
How very... This is how we get bad names for ourselves. It's people like you coming in here throwing your insults around.
No, let's put it this way. I was just a bit surprised that he's gone as far as he did, but I don't think that's the end of him. Certainly not.
Has he grown then in stature?
Without question. I mean, look, Djokovic is bound to say nice things afterwards when he's just won, but he did say that he's called him Cam Slam. He said he's going to win a slam one day, and I think that could happen. And we've got a ladies' final, or the women's final today. Ons Jabir from Tunisia, the first Arab to get to a Wimbledon final, first African to reach Wimbledon final since 1960. And then you've got the interesting story about Elena Rybakina. She's the number 17 seed.
Are you backing her? I thought I'd give an Aidan joke before he managed to give an Aidan joke.
You've set the bar low.
We've got the girls' team now. We've got to come up with some bad jokes to match the boys' bad jokes.
You set the bar low
there,
Well, there's a rumour going around that I've stopped wearing makeup, but I can tell you those rumours are without foundation.
You shouldn't have encouraged him. You should have. By the way, are the crowds back at Wimbledon?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, I was there on Wednesday, and you could not get. I was standing there holding my strawberries and cream in the queue. I mean, I could see the cream drying on the fruit, and I just couldn't. They wouldn't let you through to the Hemon Hill because there was crowds up there.
No cost of living crisis for you if you could afford strawberries and cream at
Wimbledon.
Well,
it's not.
Well, no, I was a bit worried about that cream. It was drying on the strawberries.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I know it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't conventional cream. I don't know. Maybe it was a bit of alcohol. But Pimm's was £11, but if you actually got a couple of quid back if you handed back your plastic container, so it wasn't as quite the rip-off that it sounds.
How the other half live.
And Hayley, you can tell us about that. Which story should we go to? How about Ed Sheeran? Because it's quite interesting. Known, obviously, for his singing, his songwriting, but he's moving into a different area.
Yes, he can add fashion designer to his CV. And, he's got a new fashion brand out.
But he's not known for his fashion, is he? It's more like T-shirt and jeans.
Well, yeah, I was saying it might be Aidan's kind of style.
that's on the...
I could see you in
Is she in
Asian.
dungarees? Yeah, maybe in about 1989.
Back in the day. But no, see, I think what happens is their agents kind of go, do you know what, we'll do all the work and we'll just put your name to it, because he's got a lot already, hasn't he?
Yeah.
But you're right, he's not really known for his fashion.
No.
I couldn't tell you what he wore on his last concert. So I don't know where this has come from, but he's teamed up with a brand called Lucy and Yak. It's an independent
Yak?
company.
It's not
and and it's out later this month. So keep
The bit
your eyes
I don't
peeled.
understand about all this, if I'm honest, is that I can't understand the thought process of saying, look, the Ed Sheeran, I really love his songs, so I think I'm going to buy his fashion designs. I mean,
Some people are obsessed with a star and they'll do anything to be like Ed Sheeran.
Hayley's spot on there. I mean, when you've got, and this is what the managers will be looking at, we've got all of these people who are his fans and who are his followers, and the writing, can we be in your fan club, this, that, the other. Sadly, there's all of saying, what else can we sell to them? I mean, it might just be a T-shirt with Ed on or his latest lyrics or something, but it's part of that, so that's what you're doing.
It's very different to football clubs selling shirts. You know, you might like the football, but you also buy the shirts. It's been going on for decades.
And that's why I gave that. That's why I gave that analogy there of the
Are you in
T-shirt.
the market for an Ed Sheeran?
Dungarees, certainly not. No.
And a beanie hat.
Maybe.
Next week, if you walking in the studio, Ed Sheeran's up.
And Stacey Solomon, totally different story.
OK, yeah, so she's going off on her hen do to Mykonos. And she has left Joe Swash a list of things to do while she goes away, a responsibility list, which I think is a really good idea, because when you're at school or college, you get things to do, your homework, and you have to give it in. But as an adult, you could just sit and watch Netflix all weekend and do nothing. So actually, she said, no, this is what you need to do, and I want this done the time I get back. Good on Stacey Solomon.
Right. Well, I'm a list person. Are you a list?
Yeah.
I do the list. So I've got to go. And I know, because you're always here prepared with
Esther writes the list and I have to carry them out. That's
well, Stacey's doing the same thing.
Exactly.
But the thing is, she's doing it before they're married. So what I'm saying, he knows what to expect for the whole of his life. So there's an honesty there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think Joe Swash probably needs a bit of bossing around. I can imagine him being like, oh, I'm going out with the lads. So, yeah, she's got him in where she wants him. Good on her.
The bit I'm jealous about is that, I mean, we got married in, we had a COVID wedding, and I still haven't had my stag do yet. I mean, I'm going all the... She's lucky she's going on, and I've never had my stag do.
Oh, Aidan will take you out on the town.
We're going to Ibiza, aren't we?
In the Ed Sheeran dungarees. Yes.
Well, that'll mean we'll go on our hen night.
Oh, yes.
I wasn't moaning there. See, that sounded like a bit of a moan.
You're moaning.
I didn't have a hen.
Did you?
No, we didn't. It was
need to
locked
rectify this
So that's
immediately.
right. So you do your stag. I'll be doing my hen.
I can organise it, Esther. Leave it with me.
Oh, there you go. That's sorted. And Ronan Keating, he's gone off on one.
Well, yeah, his son went into Love Island, and obviously, you know, Michael Owen's daughter's in Love Island. Actually, they got on quite well together, and I was thinking, is this an OK Magazine exclusive wedding here? Unfortunately, he has now left the villa. But I think it must be quite hard for a star like Ronan Keating to see his son in Love Island. I think it must be quite hard for him to take, because he's a big star, he's got all his fans, but to watch your son, I think it's quite a vulnerable thing, isn't it?
Well, Michael Owen had the same thing, the footballer, about his daughter going in. He was just saying, oh, you know, make me proud, don't do whatever. She went in, she owned a sports range, so she was determined that she was going to use it as a platform. And I think you have got to just use it as a platform, because I can't see what else is going on there.
Yeah, I have to say she's very mature, Michael Owen's daughter.
Gemma.
Gemma,
Yeah.
yes. Oh, first name turns. Gemma. Yeah, she really is. She really holds her own. She's not a pushover.
I think didn't her dad say she's grumpy or something?
Oh, really?
Yeah, Michael Owen said, watch out, she's a bit grumpy.
Yeah, she can be a little bit. She, you know. But the thing is, I think it's hard for these kids to go on that programme, as we've said before, you know, to ultimately get dumped in a bikini is not what you want on national TV.
Well,
so to have your daughter or son...
I'm going to ask the question, are any of you naked attraction fans?
Absolutely not. That's my worst nightmare.
Worst nightmare to watch or go on? We've got...
Both.
OK, well,
I
we've
can't
got our next guest.
Oh, OK.
Was on.
I'm off.
Naked attraction, but we're going to ask, what is the attraction of going on for naked attraction?
Aidan sounded quite keen, I thought.
I would not nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing to be embarrassed about.
Well, you'd go on, would you?
Probably. Yeah.
Oh,
There he is, sign him up.
Have you been on? Have we?
No, I haven't. No, you haven't missed me. No.
Just to confirm.
You've watched every episode, so you know.
There was a sad story though. There was which is actually quite a lot of the papers today about Anton Declan Donnelly's brother died at 55 years old. A Roman Catholic,
his older brother.
Roman Catholic priest.
That's right. Apparently he had a headache and he didn't feel well. And then he was taken to hospital. His mum and Declan rushed to his bedside, but he died peacefully yesterday afternoon, and it was a suspected blood on the brain. So it's really sad, isn't it, to read that? I'm sure they were all very close.
Apparently it was very, very close. Apparently I read that Declan's the youngest of 7 brothers and sisters.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And
a Catholic family, as you said.
Yeah, exactly. The thing that made me smile about what he'd said in the past, Dec, was that he'd considered becoming a priest as well when he was first growing up, but until he got a school bus, aged 14. And there were lots of girls on this school bus, and at that moment he decided the priesthood wasn't for him, which I thought, was very, very
My
funny.
priest always asks me every year if I'm going to join. Seriously, he does. He
Really?
does. Yeah, I've always said no. But, the time in future,
He's obviously
you never know.
sees something in you that thinks...
Yeah, maybe something divine, don't know. No, I'm joking.
Must be the...
See, I knew that was coming to a joke somewhere. I was waiting. It was a big build-up.
You're clued up now, Esther.
Yeah.
No, that's terrible. Anyway, Aidan... Hayley, I don't know if to say thank you or not. Thank you, Hayley.
My pleasure.
I'll think about whether to
See you next week.
These jokes are getting worse. But coming up after the break, we'll be joined by a contestant who appeared on the most outrageous show on British television, Naked Attraction. Not with Aidan, but maybe next time. So don't go anywhere.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. Just a couple of views here, Phil.
Mike says, what people seem to forget with a 50-year mortgage is that after 30 years, your income has probably doubled, therefore making your repayments a lot cheaper in comparison, and therefore be able to pay off your mortgage in a lot less than 50 years. But if you're renting, your rent just keeps going up and up and up.
And Chris says, regard your housing debate about seriously taxing these people's companies who own large number of houses. Oh, that shouldn't be allowed. So this is second housing. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be keeping houses as houses. Fair point.
Now, it's surely the most bizarre show on British television, where contestants strip all the way down in the hope of finding love.
Naked Attraction first aired back in 2016. I nearly said 2016 there, I don't know what was going on. Exactly. And it does exactly what it says on the tin. People pair up based completely on physical looks with clothes left at the door.
Melissa Eden stripped completely starkers on the Channel 4 show, and she joins us now to talk us through the experience. So, Melissa, look, what lots of people will be thinking is, what on earth prompted you to want to go on TV and just sort of stand there completely naked with other people?
I was bored at work. And
now, some of us think, I'm bored at work, right? I'll go out for a drink with my mates at the end of the day. You thought, I'll go on this show. How did you know the show existed? It was a brand new show. How did you find out?
I think I just found it on social media, on Facebook, and that they were looking for contestants. So I applied for it as a joke at first, weirdly enough. And yeah, then they called me like within days of like applying for it.
Now, did they say clearly what the show was about? I mean, was it explicit, a bit like the show, or did you not know? Did you sort of go in under false pretenses? What did that advert say?
No, it did say that obviously you had to be completely naked.
OK, it said that. They were straight up about that.
I thought, I didn't actually think I would get on it, but no, straight away when I applied for it. So I wasn't actually going to go on it at the time. I actually declined it at first. But then booked me a train ticket to London, and then I did my interview with them. Half of it was closed, and then half of it was closed off. So if I could do that, I thought to myself, well, I'll be able to do the show.
And so what was it like being on the TV completely naked? I mean, were you sort of... I'd be quite self-conscious, I think.
No, because equally, I've watched the show because I thought, I hadn't seen it before if I'm being on it, and I watched it. And then, although you're completely naked, they sort of reveal you naked. So you don't actually see your face. You see your body working bit by bit. Yeah. And then the person's oh, yes, I really like that person because of her boobs, or I really like that person because of her legs, or what have you. Does that make you feel less... I don't know, inhibited in a way, because your face isn't there. There is something quite sort of, just biological about it in a way.
Yeah, I find it a bit unusual, and that's kind of why, cause it's quite quirky. It's a very quirky show, very different. So that's why I wanted to go on it. So yeah, it's a bit like nerve-wracking when it goes up and up and up. It's very strange, like they'll just pick on your body and your body bits and stuff. But
what it says on the show, because we did watch it, didn't we?
We did.
We did our research. I didn't fancy applying for it, Matt, but I probably, that's.
I didn't fancy him applying.
I'm going to say no, exactly. There'll be more people laughing than crying if I went on. That is for sure. But it said their whole thing is that this is a way for people to find love, right? That this is a way that you get all everything out there before you start, and therefore this is an ideal way. Did you genuinely think that this might be an ideal way to find, a partner, a husband, or whatever?
No, definitely not.
So that wasn't the attraction. This was not your way of trying to find somebody?
No, definitely not. I just wanted to see how it all worked and stuff, because I've never been on TV by that point before. So I thought, I'll try something new. I'll go naked on TV.
What do you usually look for in a bloke first? I mean, is it a sense of humour? Is it that you can have...
I what you were going to say. Wondering what you were going to say first.
Do you know what? It is definitely a sense of humour. That's a massive thing for me.
So in a way, you have got a cracking sense of humour, the fact that you'd even go on and do the show. So it shows you. So has it opened up any opportunities? I mean, has it done what you hoped it would do by going on TV?
Yeah, I've definitely changed career.
Go on.
Yeah, so I went from a normal 9-to-5 job. I'm now in the adult industry.
So when you went on, you were what, working in an office? Or?
Yeah, just on the phones and stuff. Yeah.
And so what? Before we come on to you, what did when you went on? What did your family say? What did your friends say? What did the people in the office say? I mean, when you went back in on the...
Oh, God, it was very, very awkward. When I went in, I'll never forget it, it was just silence, complete silence.
Did you tell people you were going on?
Yeah, they knew I was going on, but we didn't know when until, last minute sort of thing. And then I'd never forget, my boss was like, I didn't watch it, and it just wouldn't even give me eye contact.
So you knew everybody had watched it.
Yeah.
Did you think about that? What, meeting people again now that they've all seen me naked. Did you think about that before you did the show?
I didn't. I mean, even like some of my old school teachers have actually like seen me naked. It is weird to think about it, but I just don't think about it.
Would you do it again?
Would I do it again? Probably not, only because I've done it before, so I know how it all works.
But if you hadn't done it, would you do it again? Were you pleased you've done it, is what I'm saying?
Yes, I'm definitely pleased, yeah. So, yeah, I know it's my one's on Netflix as well. I think it's episode 5. But also, it's not even that. I've also made like quite good friends out of it as well.
Okay.
So the guy at the end, he didn't pick me, Charles, but we've kept like in touch ever since. So.
And you were interested in the adult industry?
Well, no, I just wondered. Very good. I'll be getting in trouble later, I can tell you, Melissa, for that. No, I just wondered, was it going on this show that encouraged you to want to go and work in the adult industry, or was it something that you'd always wanted to do?
I always wanted to do a bit of modelling, so after the show, I did get scouted to do a bit of modelling, and then it just kind of like went from there, really. So I always wanted to do modelling, but not, that much into it, sort of thing. But here we are.
But you must have a lot of, you must need a lot of confidence, mustn't you, to do something? To do, I mean, are you a confident person, or did this? What I'm saying, did this help you become more confident?
I think it definitely helped. Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say that I'm that confident, but clearly I must have something.
You're more confident than most, I think.
Well, and Melissa, thank you for being so open and honest with us, because we were curious, weren't we? We were quite curious. We sorted on to and thought, who would do that? But thank you for sharing your...
And we're pleased it's worked out well for you, with your... Absolutely, there's been a massive positive out of that,
and you're here at a week of great intrigue, obviously, with Boris Johnson resigning there, and all of the calls that have been coming in have been about who should be the next leader, and we've got Margaret says, I believe Ben Wallace has the gravitas and the cool head needed. Let's hear more about him, please.
James says, please could you encourage Jacob Rees-Mogg to throw his hat in? He's a clear winner.
He said no, though, hasn't he?
Jacob has said he's not going to stand.
What about you? Did you like Boris? Are you sad to see him go?
No comment.
Oh, OK, no comment. But I thought, no, some people said they are sad to see him go.
I think I am a little bit, but I think whoever's going to be... the replacement, I don't think there'll be any better sort of thing. So.
He's free to apply to Naked Attraction.
Imagine.
Peter says, Philip, you just have to look at the high street in this country and at the number of greasy takeaway outlets on those streets. This is when you asked the question. I can't believe. What was the figure?
30% of people in Yorkshire are eating a kebab every day.
And Peter says, I'm surprised the number having a kebab is so low. Look at the obese people in this country.
And Nicola says, I'm from Yorkshire. Fantastic person you clearly are, Nicola. And if they weren't as fattening as they are, I would definitely eat kebabs every day with plenty of chilli sauce. Some of the guys I work with go down to the local chippy for a kebab at dinner time. I do believe that Yorkshire eats the most kebabs. It's in our culture now. So there you go, Nicola. You obviously know more than me. You a kebab fan, Melissa?
I don't really like kebab.
If you're not from Yorkshire, that's what it is, you see.
Yeah, so that's what, you've had your say there. It is going to be a big week. It has been a momentous week in the world of politics. It's going to be quick decisions through next week, the 1922.
Things are going to move very quickly next week, so we'll revisit it all next week.
Yeah, and you've got on the Monday, the 1922 committee will come through with how the rules are going to work, the timing, how many backers you've already got to get. So we will be following the news as it breaks. There will be lots of breaking news, but that's all from us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, we will see you next week at the same time, but don't go anywhere, because next it's Alistair and Friends.
Join us every Sunday at 10 a.m. for The Political Correction.
We're here to put you, the people, back in charge. Our debate is about all areas of the United Kingdom.
It's about what's really going on in our country.
It's about you. So please get in touch and tell us what you think.
Don't miss it. It's The Political Correction every Sunday at 10 a.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alistair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. We have plenty coming up today. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has, as you may have just noticed, resigned, and the Conservative leadership race has begun. That's also a race to be the Prime Minister of this country. So who will be the next Tory leader? And what are the big issues that matter most to you? I really want to hear from you today, perhaps more than any time recently. But first, let's bring you right up to speed with all the news